Yeah, I know what you might be thinking. Whoa, Keegan, this isn't your normal type of content. What's going on? Well, I'm trying something different. So, what exactly is going on? Well, I found a video by Bishop Tom Brown on YouTube that made the extraordinary claim that atheism, generally agreed to be the lack of belief in a god, doesn't follow common sense, or something along those lines. So I thought I'd take a look at it. So why waste any more time and get right on into the video.
Atheism doesn't have common sense. You see, almost the entire world, more than 90% of the world, believes in some form of deity or God.
I quite honestly have no idea how legitimate that claim is, and honestly, I don't even really care. Relying on the fact that a mass of the population is theistic isn't a strong argument. In fact, that's called ad populum. Just because a majority of the population believes in something, or thinks a certain way, doesn't mean that it's right, and most certainly does not make it true. If we were to decide what is right and wrong based on how many people believed it, history is doomed to repeat itself, and we'll never learn.
Less than 10% of the world's population is atheistic or agnostic. Do you realize that? A very small percentage. And if it's 60-40, then that's a big percentage. That's like a landslide in an election. But when you have 90% or more believing in God or some form of God who made the world, then that ought to tell you something, that being an atheist and an agnostic makes no common sense.
I get the common part, being that most of the world believes in at least one, but that doesn't necessarily make it sensible. And even if it were, that wouldn't make atheism nonsensical, because generally speaking, atheism isn't asserting a claim. It's just a lack of a belief in a god or gods. Would it be nonsensical of you to not believe in Bartholomew, my sparkling invisible friend that's been controlling my mind ever since I was 12, if all of my other friends told you that he's real? No, of course not, because that's an extraordinary claim with no sufficient evidence.
How could you, if you're an atheist, say, well, I'm right and almost the entire world is wrong?
I'm not gonna sit here and say that atheists never claimed that there isn't a god. We certainly do from time to time. However, just being an atheist isn't asserting anything. We aren't saying that you're wrong, we're just not buying it.
That almost sounds like a conspiracy theorist. You're always going to get a small percentage of doctors or lawyers, small percentage of ministers that's going to hold to some outlandish lie. We call it conspiracy theories. But that's what atheists and agnostics are doing. They're holding to an idea that hardly anyone accepts to be true. And yet an atheist, an agnostic, thinks their idea is the right one.
To many people, what he just said probably sounds convincing, but the comparison between atheists and conspiracy theorists is, and hear me out for this, complete and total bullshit. Yes, there is a similarity between atheism and conspiracy theorists, being that small population thinks something different than the rest. However, the main glaring difference is that atheists don't claim there to be some huge conspiracy going on. We don't think that there's this huge plot against us, or that the world is secretly being controlled to believe in a god. We just see that most of the world does, and that's that. We're not theorizing anything at all. We just don't believe in what most other people believe.
And there is validity in common sense.
Sure, I can see that being true. But you haven't demonstrated how theism is sensical or how atheism is nonsensical.
Common sense is simply that. It means it is a knowledge in which most people agree to be true.
No, that's not right. You forgot the second half where you explain how it makes sense. You can't just say most people believe it, so it's common sense, because you're leaving out the entire second half of common sense.
And if you can't accept what most people agree to be true, then we really can't have debates or arguments. This is why common sense is an important tool in debate.
I disagree again. A belief in a god isn't common sense. Babies aren't born thinking that they are some sort of divine creation made by some magical being beyond our understanding. Why and how would they even be thinking of such a big looming question? And they don't grow into it without being exposed to the idea to begin with. For a person to believe in a faith, they need to be presented with that faith. We cannot say for a fact that there is or is not a god, because we simply cannot know. It's not as simple as saying 2 + 2 = 4, as much as Matt Powell would like you to think that it is. This is why we can, in fact, debate the existence of a god and why it's so important to do so. Just because a book claims that there is a god does not mean that there is one. And similarly, just because there is no evidence that there is a god doesn't mean that there isn't one.
Atheists and agnostics are rejecting what is common sense to the rest of the world.
No. We are rejecting what is common to the rest of the world. We are rejecting the claims of religions and beliefs with nothing to back them up. We are rejecting the thought that we should just follow what some preacher says in a church because he claims he's speaking for a being above us all. And that is the one thing that unites us.
And that alone ought to show you how suspect their belief that God doesn't exist or that he's not likely to exist is such a fallacy. It shows you their error in their thinking.
Atheism isn't necessarily the belief that there isn't a God. It's simply the lack of belief in a God. If it helps, think of it like this. Everybody is a glass, and however full it is of water is how much that person believes in a God. Atheists' glass are empty. They're not asserting anything. They just lack water. Also, not believing in something with no evidence isn't a fallacy and doesn't become one just because most people believe in it.
And it confirms what the Bible says, that a fool has said, not a smart person, a fool has said, there's no God. Because it doesn't make any common sense.
Again, just because your holy book says something doesn't make it true. Also, I thought Christianity was supposed to be loving. Why does it feel like you guys are constantly being judgmental? Anyway, I honestly gotta hand it to him. This is one of the most bearable videos trying to argue against atheism that I've ever seen. Does that make him right? No. Do I still want him to reconsider his stance on non-believers? Absolutely. But just because I disagree with this man does not mean that y'all get to go harass him. I've been Red Panda Keegan, and I'll hopefully be seeing you all again soon.